Some stories aren't meant to be told. They linger in the dark corners of forgotten homes, whispered between walls where no one dares listen. This is one of those stories. And once you hear it, you'll never forget it. Started with a letter. Clara Jennings wasn't one for sentimentality. She kept her past tucked away in dusty boxes, buried in the attic of her aging Victorian home in Waverley. The town itself was an afterthought, a forgotten on the map where winters lasted too long, and the shadows arrived early. Clara had lived alone since her husband, Evan, died 5 years earlier. She spoke to no one. The mail carrier left letters in a crooked box out front, most of which remained unopened. Bills, church flyers, meaningless remnants of a world she'd long since turned her back on. But on a brittle October morning, with mist rolling through the skeletal trees and the chill clinging to the windows like a warning, one letter arrived that was impossible to ignore. It was old, the envelope yellowed with age, the ink smudged and curling at the edges. No return address. Only her name, scrawled in a hand she hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Eleanor. The name struck her like a blow to the chest. Memories she thought she'd buried deeper than any grave came clawing their way to the surface. Eleanor Worthington, her childhood best friend, her closest confidant, and the one person Clara had betrayed so completely she could never forgive herself. Her hands trembled as she peeled the envelope open. Inside, a single sheet of paper. A note, written in the same crooked hand. It's time to let go. That night Clara couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled in its usual way, but there was a heaviness in the air, like a storm building without rain. She kept hearing soft taps at the window, though when she pulled back the curtain, nothing stirred in the dense fog. In the old parlor, a clock chimed midnight. Clara sat alone by the fireplace, nursing a glass of whiskey, the letter lying on the table before her. The flames cast uneasy shadows on the walls, shapes that twisted and shifted when she wasn't looking directly at them. A cold gust swept through the room, though no door or window was open. The fire flickered, and for a moment, the room seemed to darken, the shadows thickening. Then a voice, distant, coming from somewhere deep within the walls. Clara! She bolted upright, heart hammering in her chest. The house settled again, or perhaps it was something else. She couldn't be sure. The voice came again, barely a whisper. Why didn't you let me go? Her throat tightened. She tried to convince herself it was the wind, the remnants of an old house aching in the night. But deep down she knew better. Because Clara Jennings had a secret. One that no one in Waverley, not even Evan, had ever known. A secret buried beneath the floorboards of that very house. When she was 17, Clara and Eleanor were inseparable. 2 wild, reckless girls with hearts too big for their brittle little town. But jealousy is a quiet, insidious thing, and love, especially the forbidden kind, can turn loyalty into something dangerous. They both loved the same boy, Lucas Ainsley. And in the end, Clara had done something unspeakable to keep him. No one ever found Eleanor's body. She disappeared on a storm-drenched night, the official word being that she'd run away to New York to chase dreams of Broadway lights and endless parties. But Clara knew the truth. Knew where she'd made her final resting place. And now she was back. The next morning, Clara found muddy footprints in the hallway. Small, barefoot impressions leading from the front door to the basement. The lock to the old cellar door, one that hadn't been opened in over a decade, was unlatched. The basement had always unnerved her. The air was thick down there, perpetually damp, with stone walls that wept in the cold. It was where her father had kept his tools and her mother stored preserves no one ever ate. And it was where Eleanor waited. Clara clutched the letter in her pocket, steeling herself against the knot of dread in her gut, and descended the narrow staircase. Each step groaned beneath her weight. The light bulb overhead flickered, then dimmed. A smell hit her, earth and rot, something long dead and disturbed. In the far corner of the basement, beneath an old sheet draped over forgotten boxes, something moved. Clara froze. The sheet rippled as though stirred by an unseen hand. The air grew frigid, her breath coming in visible puffs. Then a figure emerged. Gaunt, pale as wax, with eyes too dark to be human. Hair hung in wet, matted strands, and a crooked smile twisted its lips. "I never left, Clara," it rasped. Clara stumbled back, heart clawing against her ribs, the letter dropping from her grasp. The figure stepped forward, its feet leaving muddy prints in its wake. The face was unmistakable. Eleanor. But it wasn't the girl Clara had known. This was something else. A hollow, vengeful thing, clinging to the place she'd died. A restless spirit that had waited, and waited, for the moment Clara would be forced to face what she'd done. "You promised we'd be friends forever," the thing crooned. The last thing Clara remembered before darkness took her was the cold touch of dead fingers brushing her cheek. When she awoke, she was lying on the basement floor. The light bulb overhead swung on its cord, casting dizzying shadows. The figure was gone. The footprints remained. And the letter now read something different. "You have until midnight to let go." Clara scrambled to her feet, a sick certainty blooming inside her. Let go of what? The past. The memory. Or perhaps the only thing tethering Eleanor's spirit to this world was Clara herself. But how do you let go of a ghost? She would have to find out. Because something told her. If she didn't, she wouldn't survive another night. Clara didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat by the front window as the fog thickened, staring at the skeletal outline of the trees in the yard. Every few minutes, she thought she saw a figure lingering just beyond the mist, a pale face, a flicker of movement. But when she blinked, it vanished. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Every creak in the floorboards was a footstep, every distant whisper of wind a voice calling her name. The letter, now wrinkled and torn at the edges, sat in her lap. "You have until midnight to let go." She kept turning the words over in her mind. What did it mean? What was she meant to do? The past couldn't be undone. The dead couldn't be made to forget. Ugh. A memory surfaced then, sharp and cruel. That night so long ago, when she and Eleanor had fought in this very house. It had been raining, a vicious, relentless downpour that hammered against the windows and drowned out their screams. Eleanor had found out about Clara and Lucas. The betrayal. The lies. And Clara, driven by guilt and rage, had done the unforgivable. She still remembered the sickening crack as Eleanor's head struck the corner of the hearth. The way her body crumpled like a discarded doll. The blood. The silence. Panicked and desperate, Clara had dragged the body down to the basement, buried it beneath the loose floorboards, covering the earth with heavy stones and old crates. And then, she let the years wash over it. Or so she thought. Now, it seemed the past wasn't content to stay buried. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. when she finally moved. She gathered what she could. A flashlight, a crowbar, and a tattered leather-bound book her grandmother had once claimed held old protective charms. Desperate people did desperate things. The basement door stood ajar. A faint smell of damp earth wafted up the stairs, stronger than before. The darkness below seemed alive, thick and waiting. Clara gripped the flashlight and descended. This time there was no flickering light bulb. Only the narrow beam of her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The muddy footprints from the night before remained, leading to the far corner where the sheets still draped over forgotten boxes. Her heart pounded. She knelt by the old floorboards, the crowbar cold and heavy in her trembling hands. Every instinct screamed for her to leave, but she knew she wouldn't make it through another night. Not if she left it undone. The wood was soft with age. It groaned and splintered under the crowbar's prying edge. It didn't take long. The stench hit her first, a rank, sour odor of rot and wet earth. Beneath the boards, the soil was dark and sunken, a clear sign of something long buried. Clara's stomach heaved, but she forced herself to dig. Her fingers clawed through the dirt, pulling away stones, dead roots, fragments of old bone. Time blurred. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the flashlight beam swaying wildly. And then her hand brushed fabric. Clara froze. It was still there, the remains of a faded dress, the once pale blue now stained with soil and decay. The bones beneath had collapsed inward, fragile and crumbling, but the outline was unmistakable. Eleanor. Clara swallowed a cry, tears stinging her eyes. She sat back on her heels, heart splitting open with a grief she'd locked away for 20 years. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "God, Eleanor. I'm so sorry." The air shifted. From the far corner of the basement came a soft, wet whisper. "Too late." The flashlight flickered and died. In total darkness, Clara scrambled backward, the earth cold and wet beneath her hands. The temperature plummeted. Her breath came in thick, visible clouds. And then she felt it, cold fingers curling around her wrist. She screamed, lurching away, but the grip tightened. The ground itself seemed to pulse, the walls closing in. A voice, layered with sorrow and fury, echoed around her. "You kept me here. You never let me go." A flicker of light appeared then, the faint, ghostly figure of Eleanor, her face both familiar and monstrous, eyes black and bottomless. "You have to finish it." Clara trembled, barely able to speak. I don't know how." The figure pointed toward the old book Clara had dropped near the stairs. The pages fluttered, opening to a yellowed, handwritten passage. "Release of the unrest." The words blurred through Clara's tears. She scrambled to the book, the basement growing colder with every heartbeat. The ritual was simple in instruction but heavy in price. To free the soul trapped by betrayal, the living must bear witness and speak the truth aloud before earth and shadow. Only then can the restless depart. Clara swallowed hard. Had to be here. In this house. In this place where it happened. The clock upstairs began to chime. Midnight. She knelt by the exposed grave, her voice shaking. "I killed you, Eleanor," she began, the words like glass in her throat. "I was jealous. I was weak. I couldn't stand losing Lucas to you. I let my anger take you from this world." The basement seemed to tremble. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The air buzzed with unseen electricity. "I buried you here and told no one. I've carried it but I never made it right. And I never let you go." A faint light shimmered around the skeletal remains. The ghostly form of Eleanor stepped forward, the darkness receding around her. "Say it all, Clara." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "You deserved to live. You deserved to be free. And I kept you trapped. I kept you from moving on because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done." The light grew brighter. The ghost's face softened, though her eyes remained shadowed. The old book's final line glowed faintly. "Release comes at a cost." Clara's pulse spiked. What cost? Eleanor's ghost knelt beside her, placing an icy hand over Clara's heart. "A life for a life." The realization struck her like a hammer. To truly let go, Clara would have to give something of herself. Perhaps her life. Perhaps something worse. And she understood then that forgiveness was not hers to claim, only the act of setting right what she had broken. "I'm not afraid," Clara whispered. The ghost smiled, sad and beautiful. "Then it's done." The room filled with a blinding light. A howling wind swept through the basement, lifting dust and debris, rattling the old stone walls. The sensation of falling, of being pulled into some other place, gripped Clara. And then silence. When the light faded, the basement was empty. No remains. No footprints. No lingering scent of rot. Clara lay alone on the floor, the old book closed beside her. The clock above struck 1. She stood slowly, feeling older, heavier. The weight of decades lifted, replaced by something cold and final. But she was alive. Clara climbed the basement stairs and stepped into the quiet house. The fog had lifted outside. The oppressive weight that had haunted the rooms for so long was gone. And on the table by the window, a single white lily rested in a glass. Peace offering. Or a farewell. She wasn't sure which. The letter was gone. The footprints erased. And in the hush of early morning, Clara Jennings knew the truth. She had let go. But something inside her whispered that the debt wasn't paid in full. Not yet. Because the past has a way of clinging, and some lessons are never truly learned. especially in houses like this, where the dead never sleep for long. For a while it seemed over. The house was still. The walls, once whispering, kept their silence. No more muddy footprints. No more ghostly figures in the mist. Clara Jennings could finally breathe without feeling a cold hand on her shoulder. She kept to the upstairs rooms, avoided the basement entirely, and told herself the worst was behind her. Weeks passed. Autumn turned to a bitter, gray-skied winter. The world outside her windows became a place of ice and dead leaves, and Clara began to feel a fragile sort of peace. But grief, real ancient grief, isn't something that releases its grip easily. And some debts, no matter how well buried, don't stay paid. Began with the dreams. They started subtly. Shadows moving at the edge of her vision. A voice humming a lullaby she half remembered from childhood. At night, she'd wake to the sound of a woman sobbing just outside her bedroom door. And every time she opened it, there was nothing. One morning, Clara found something odd on her doorstep. A single, wilted white lily, identical to the one left on the table after the ritual. No note, no explanation. The next day, another. And another. By the 7th day, her porch was littered with dying lilies, their petals brown-edged and brittle. The piece she thought she'd bought began to unravel. That evening, Clara sat in front of the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shapes along the walls. The book, the one with the release ritual, lay open in her lap. She'd read and reread the words, searching for something she missed, some loophole or forgotten line. And there, scribbled faintly in the margins, a note in her grandmother's spidery hand. Beware the false peace. What we bind, we inherit. Clara felt a chill that wasn't from the winter air. False peace. Had the ritual freed Eleanor? Or merely traded one prison for another? What had she really inherited? At midnight, the house stirred, the same way it had before. Clara moved cautiously through the old halls, flashlight in hand. The bulb overhead flickered and died, plunging her into a thick, unnatural darkness. A cold breeze swept past her, carrying with it a voice, but this one wasn't Eleanor's. It was deeper, rougher, a man's voice. You let her go, and left me behind. Clara's blood ran cold. A face appeared in the window's reflection, a gaunt, hollow-eyed man she recognized at once. Lucas Ainsley. But it couldn't be. Lucas had left Waverley a year after Eleanor vanished, swallowed by a world far from Clara's own. She hadn't seen him in 20 years. He'd never come back. Till now. The reflection grinned, though the lips didn't move. The glass cracked, a jagged spiderweb radiating from the center. Clara stumbled back, heart thudding. A deep rumble echoed from beneath the floorboards. The basement. Course. She'd buried one secret. But perhaps there had been another. A memory struck her. That night, after Eleanor's fall, after Clara buried her in the basement, she'd gone to Lucas, told him what happened, begged him to help her. And he had. But Lucas had his own sins. He'd wanted to silence Clara, protect his name, his family's reputation. He'd attacked her in that same basement, hands around her throat, threatening to end it all. And in a moment of raw survival, Clara had struck him down. A second grave. Second secret. Buried deeper still. She hadn't remembered. Or more truthfully, she hadn't let herself remember. Till now. The house moaned as though in pain, the walls shivering. The voice called again, closer this time. You freed her. You owe me now. Clara's stomach clenched. It hadn't been just Eleanor. It had never been just her. The house, the land itself, had become a vessel for every terrible thing she'd done. And by releasing Eleanor without atonement for the second sin, she'd cracked open something far worse. Something that wanted more than confession. It wanted her. Clara fled to the basement door. This time it wasn't locked. The air was thick, suffocating, the scent of old earth and decay rising to meet her. The flashlight's beam danced wildly as she descended. Half the basement wall had caved in, revealing a yawning cavity behind the stone, a crude tunnel, lined with rotting wood supports and tangled roots. At its end a figure waited. Lucas. But not as he'd been. His face was a ruin of bone and rot. His suit tattered and stained with earth. His eyes glinted like shards of glass. He stepped forward. "Your life for mine," he rasped. Clara raised the flashlight, backing away. "No, no, I buried you, I." The ground trembled. From the walls, faces emerged. Not just Lucas and Eleanor, but others, hollow-eyed, featureless things that carried an air of the long-forgotten. The house's history, soaked in blood and secrets. The sins of her ancestors. The deaths no one spoke of. It wasn't just Clara's debt. It was the house's. The book's final warning burned in her mind. What we bind, we inherit. And she'd inherited a house of horrors. A choice formed in her mind, cold and clear. There was no running, no hiding, only a final act of release. Clara dropped the flashlight and grabbed the crowbar still resting near the exposed grave. She swung it at the old timber supports, shattering the decaying beams. The tunnel began to collapse. Lucas lunged, an inhuman howl tearing from his throat, but the earth swallowed him whole. The ceiling buckled. Stone and soil cascaded down, sealing the dead within their tomb. Clara scrambled up the stairs, the house groaning in protest. Dust billowed. The air grew thicker, suffocating. She knew what she had to do. At the top of the stairs, she grabbed the kerosene lamp her father had kept for storms. Doused the old wooden floor. The scent was sharp, acrid. The house moaned again, 1,000 voices rising in unison. She struck a match and let it fall. Flames roared to life, hungry and eager, devouring wood, paint, and memory alike. The firestorm spread quickly, as if the house itself had longed for release. Clara stumbled from the house as the roof collapsed in a bloom of sparks. Outside, the cold air wrapped around her, the dawn just beginning to color the horizon. Behind her the house burned. And with it, the voices fell silent. The lilies stopped appearing. The whispers faded. The burden passed. Clara left Waverly that very night, her car pointed toward the highway, a single bag in the back seat, and no plan of where to go next. Some stories she knew you couldn't outrun, but you could choose never to live them again. She never returned to the town, and no one ever built on that land again. It stayed an empty lot, the earth scorched and barren. Locals claimed nothing would grow there, that animals refused to cross it. Children whispered it was cursed. They were right. But Clara Jennings never looked back. Because some truths, once unearthed, will follow you forever. And some lessons you never truly forget.